Do funky fantasy. Do the bowl. Da Stratus arrows. It's the bum war of nerds. Dum. I bet y'all can guess what today's episode is, and that's right, it's Lord of the Rings. Welcome back to the War of Nerds podcast, episode number 3. I'm Nathan Helm.
I'm Alfred Muller.
I'm Ryan, also known as Stratoceros.
And together we are the Bearded Nerds, and we are here to bring you glorious nerddom about all topics from around the world of entertainment. And today, if you couldn't tell by the little wonky intro, we're talking about one of the most iconic and legendary books slash movie trilogies of all time, and that is J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and what Peter Jackson did with the movies, which is also fantastic. So, we're gonna start by talking about The Hobbit, the book and the movies, and we'll move on to Lord of the Rings in the second half. So, Alfred or Ryan, why don't you start off by telling us what makes The Hobbit the most legendary fantasy book ever written?
I think it just speaks to the whimsical desire a lot of us have to go on an adventure, to just abandon everything and be able to say, I want to go do X, and then actually accomplish it, even though the odds may be completely stacked against you.
I definitely agree with that sentiment, and I think both the books and the movies were just groundbreaking for their time. He pretty much created a genre for us in his books, and when the movies came out, they broke ground cinematically and overall just with the theme of their movies, able what they were able to portray and the different audience they were able to reach that was never really a fantasy audience until these movies and these books came around.
100%. And even to this day, The Hobbit's one of only a select few books that sold over 100 million copies worldwide. And not even the Lord of the Rings books have sold that many. The Fellowship of the Ring sold 90 million, but The Hobbit has always been the one that was that groundbreaking. Most people, when they talk about rereading Lord of the Rings, they always talk about The Hobbit as the book that they read each year. And perhaps it's because The Hobbit entails that adventure-esque story, that quest that we all wanted to see, to be a part of. I mean, you've got dragons, you've got more history on the wizards like Gandalf and Saruman, and even Galadriel, and these characters that we saw in Lord of the Rings, but more of an ancient history about them. And even some things that tied together history about the elves and the dwarves and the race of men. So um, Gandalf is ever so present in the book, and in the movies, which is fantastic, because he's my favorite character. I think he's a lot of people's favorite character, um, except for Lord of the Rings. Sam's my favorite character because he's the MVP. But
Yep.
aside from that, The Hobbit, the book to me is better than the movies. I feel like the movies they were they were they were they were squeezed way. They tried to squeeze too much out of something that there's one book, and The Hobbit is only about the size of Fellowship of the Rings. It's no larger than that book, maybe by a little bit. And The Lord of the Rings had 3 movies for 3 books, and you're trying to make 3 movies out of one book. Therefore, I think 2 movies would have served the purpose just fine. Split the story of
Mhm.
Smaug up as you end the first movie with Smaug, and you start the second movie off with them, like, escaping from Smaug or whatever, to lead to the Battle of the Five Armies, and leave it at that. I think it would have served the purpose a lot better, and it wouldn't have dragged and kind of just drug us through the mud for a lot of just kind of senseless nonsense in the movies. But don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed it, but not like I did with Lord of the Rings.
Did either of you guys see the old, I think it was the 80s cartoon version of The Hobbit?
That was one of my first experiences with The Hobbit and the scene with the trolls and the stone from that cartoon. Like that scene sticks with me even to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Absolutely.
love that one. and that's probably an hour and a half, if that, movie, and I think it did a really good job of encapsulating the Hobbit book.
100%.
I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm. So, do we all agree that, I mean, it's okay. I mean, those listening to the podcast, you're going to realize sometimes all three of us agree on something, and sometimes all three of us have different opinions, and sometimes it is a true war of nerds where we all have different points of view. But this time, kind of gathering you guys feel about the same way that I do, that the book is better than the movies. In all ways, but the movies still are they're a fun little treat. They're a fun little adventure to see some of our beloved characters that we saw in Lord of the Rings. Just kind of get to revisit, and a little bit of old. You get to see more about the wizards that you didn't get to see in Lord of the Rings. Um, get to learn we had shapeshifters in Lord of the Rings, so more exploration into the magical side of things, which I thought was brilliant. I could have done without all of the it was really Bilbo with the dwarves. That was where everything kind of slowed down. Them walking around was a whole bunch of nothing. Um, the trolls, that's the most iconic scene from The Hobbit. And they did that.
Mhm.
Well done. Brilliant. However, I think they just kind of went. Peter Jackson is a madman and a brilliant director, but I think he just kind of there was a lot of talks. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's son, if not grandson, it was either his son or grandson, was so salty about the fact that Peter Jackson did not make the movies for the Lord of the Rings long enough and did not show as much of the lore as he should have. But Peter Jackson was like, these movies are already 4 hours plus long each. I went into it. I went mad lore man, like Peter Jackson's known for. But he's like, okay, fine. You want that? I got you, bro. Here comes The Hobbit. We're going to make 3 movies out of 1 book, and we're going to drag all y'all through this. And that's kind of what happened with it. And it was a split 50-50 reaction. There's some people who are like, yeah, I love the Hobbit movies. I love all of them, everything about it. And there's some people who are more kind of lean with us. Like there was parts about them that were excellent and wonderful, but it was just drug out more. They tried to make it drug out more for what it was worth. And there's no reason to do that. You could have had one 4.5 hour long movie for The Hobbit, and it would have honestly, it would have been fine, I think.
I think they might have suffered from what I call the Harry Potter syndrome, where Harry Potter split book 7 into 2 different movies, and then you've had like the Twilight that split their final book into 2 different movies. And I feel like a lot of different, even though they did it in reverse, technically The Hobbit would be the last book they turned into a movie of Tolkien, so they split that into 3 movies. I just
The
think
Hunger
certain
Games.
books, the Hunger Games, they split that into 2 different movies, and it's not needed. I mean, some
No.
books needed multiple movies, some books don't. And you could tell when they suffer from that because there's filler space, there's less, the pacing is off, which kind of throws the movies out of whack.
I
It
completely
slows
agree.
down.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan, go ahead, buddy.
I was just gonna say I completely agree with that. And I think unfortunately with Hollywood, it's that money grab. You can make more money off of 3 movies than you can make off of one. But back to your Christopher Tolkien remarks, I didn't actually know that, but the story I had also heard that kind of feeds into that was he was the reason the book got written because J.R.R. Tolkien used to tell the story to his kids or grandkids, and he would mix up the details. And Christopher Tolkien would tell him, no, last time you told me the door was this color. And finally, he had to get to a point where he wrote it down so that the details would remain the same. And that's kind of the reason we have it now. So for him to want those details in the movies from the books that he obviously fondly remembered kind of does fit that personality. So I hadn't heard that story, but that definitely aligns with the other ones I have heard.
I forget where
Yeah.
I heard that, but I heard that one too, and that's just great. Like, and I think he was very heavily involved in the Lord of the Rings too, like wanting to make sure that it was done. And being an author, I'm very protective of the source material. Like that, I want to see an 80-hour movie where you go verbatim from the book. So I'm glad that he was a part of that. You see the same thing with J.K. Rowling. She was heavily influencing the Harry Potter movies, and I think those are the two best series that were turned into movies that were done, and the rest kind of you get hit or miss.
Mhm.
You can tell when a creator has stepped away from their work and allowed somebody else, whether they sold it away for the love of money or whatever happened, and you can see the quality of the content suffer and draw away from what it was originally intended to be due to corporate greed, money, whatever. It's like you were talking about, they're going to make money on it one way or the other. It's the same thing with Disney and Star Wars. J.J. Abrams came in trying to save the sequel trilogy, which was really just a hopeless situation. But he was supposed to be the one to direct all three movies originally, right? All right,
Yeah.
so he did The Force Awakens. Then he was offered the opportunity to work with James Gunn on a project, which I wouldn't say no to. James Gunn's he's a beast, so why wouldn't you? So that brings in Rian Johnson. Well, then episode 8 is just a walking catastrophe. And then J.J. Abrams has to come back. He wanted to fix it. And he went to Kathleen Kennedy and said, hey, let me fix this. This is what the fans deserve. These people have been loyal Star Wars fans since they were in diapers. They deserve to have quality, good Star Wars lore in their movie. No, we're going to make money either way, so it comes out when it comes out. He's like, okay, well, I'm done working with Disney after this because that's not fair to the fans. That's not what the people who the reason you have what you have is because they spent money and time and investment for all those years to give you a fan base, to give you that community. So that's what can happen, unfortunately. You brought up J.K. Rowling. The Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them are nowhere near as good as the Harry Potter movies. Not even close.
Yeah.
Not even an inkling close.
No.
The idea was there, and there's things I won't get into that I don't agree with what they did in the movies, referring to some actors and stuff, but it just it didn't have that pizzazz that the Harry Potter movies had that they got from the books. So it's kind of sad because when you follow something for so long and you're so loyal to it, and then it just lets you down, it makes you less inclined to jump on to something in the future to have that hope again. You know what I mean?
So Nathan, I know your favorite character from Lord of the Rings is the Great Wizard Gandalf, but Ryan, who's your favorite character if you have one?
Well, I mean, when he went earlier about Sam being one of the MVPs, I definitely 100% agree with that. I don't think Frodo makes it to the mountain without Sam the entire way, and the fact that he comes back. But outside of that, if we just go The Hobbit, it's a tough one. I do really like Gandalf, but I do think Bilbo's character and growth through The Hobbit, and then when you see him later on, just characters for me are what sell it. When you have an arc and you see a character go through what they go through and come out the other side for the better or worse, like Bilbo's arc for The Hobbit is just fantastic, and that's really like the character I'm drawn to in the Hobbit series.
My favorite's Tom Bombadil.
Mhm.
No, my favorite is Strider.
Oh yeah.
I'm always drawn to a ranger slash knight in that regard, and Aragorn is my favorite. He embodies everything that I love about D&D and fantasy and the king coming back, that kind of stuff. But Bilbo obviously is just a great character to watch. You could probably do an entire like college level course on the character of Bilbo and really teach young writers the proper way to create a character and just stretch them out and see what you could do to somebody. But if I had to pick a favorite, it would be Aragorn.
That's one thing Tolkien did with his books that were so brilliant. Not only his naming conventions, which have been used as inspiration for so many, that Skyrim-esque naming convention that has been used time and time again. His beauty of naming, not just characters, but places like Minas Morgul That is one of the coolest names ever. Minas Tirith, like the Dunedain, like a
Mhm.
race of men blessed with long life, like Aragorn. And when you first meet him, like Ryan was saying, Strider, like that's the so cool. Like
Yep.
Strider, you think he's this bad dude, and he like removes his hood, and he's just like, "You're very far away from home, Mister Underhill." Like, oh my good, who is this man? I'm very in the at the same time, the Witch King of the Nazgul and the rest of the Ring Wraiths are like coming after them, and you get this
Nazgul,
like,
Ring Wraith. I mean, that in
oh
and of itself, I love. And he's a linguist by trade, so I mean, you have the ability. Like, there are just some words that are fun to say, and
Mhm.
he was a master of that. I mean, he's the reason we have maps in fantasy books. He's the reason we have different languages in fantasy books. I mean, I know in lore and like mythology, dwarves and elves existed, but he's the reason we have them orcs in the way that we have them now.
yeah. When you think of orcs, you think of Lord of the Rings, really. I mean, that was the first ever time. I mean, you want to go back to like King Arthur, Arthurian fantasy, Round Table, fairy tale magic, yeah, fairies and elves and giants and mythological creatures, corgis and whatnot. They've been around, but orcs in the way that the history behind orcs, they were once men or elves, and they became these beastly creatures because they were like experimented on by either Sauron or one of his dark followers. The way that Saruman talks about it, he's like, these orcs, and you're like, oh man, he says, we worship Saruman. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
How do they know what a menu is?
You remember that scene? They're like, what about their legs? They don't need those. They're to be unpunished. Scream. No one's gonna hear you. Ah.
Oh,
But you start in Lord of the Rings at the beginning, right? You've got this awesome quest fantasy that starts off in the Shire. You meet Gandalf, you meet Frodo, and Bilbo, who's 111 years old. That line he said, where he's just like, it's my 111th birthday. I know half of you about half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. People are like, what? Oh man. And you just
I,
start there, man. When you see about
I
this ring, what's that?
I was just gonna say, just that line alone, I think with all three of us being writers, I think that's what we want our ultimate goal to be, is someone to just be able to quote from our work that has just created such perfect line that it's memorable, like most of the book and the lines from the movies. Like they never leave your head the way they were created.
yes, we had first breakfast, but what about second breakfast?
Don't think they know about second breakfast, Pip.
What about elevensies?
They're
Buckle
sitting on
dinner?
top. They're there at Isengard, and Gimli and Gandalf and all of them show up. He's like, this place is run by Treebeard now. He's like, we've got the best pipe weed and um smoked pork, and Gimli's just a smoked pork. Gandalf is just like fool of a took.
Potatoes.
Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. Awful. Foul
Cue
torrents.
the cue the music.
Dun, 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 dun. Oh, speaking about cue the music, it depends on my mood. When it comes to soundtracks of a movie, The Lord of the Rings takes the cake and bakes it above all others. And it depends on my mood. I'll put Star Wars up there because Star Wars, and John Williams is a legend in himself. But that fantasy-esque, I mean, think of all the things that came after Skyrim, The Witcher, Doba King, Zova Ring, Zova this plus Farin. That's the Dragonborn theme song. And that stuff comes from the legendary theme song of the Riders of Rohan, or the theme song for Gondor, or the Orcs theme song. And like you're like listening to that, like Sam and Frodo and them are running from the ring wraiths, and dum 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 dum. Like if you had a movie you watched it, but with no music whatsoever, it's actually quite hilarious to watch because of how pathetic it is. You add the music is what adds soul to a movie. You can have script, the best characters written, the most amazing plot and foundation, but that music, when it comes to a movie, is what really just the goosebumps, they come from that music adding to that scene.
If I'm not
Um,
mistaken, even original plays and everything, Shakespeare and whatnot, they had an orchestra or some type of musician playing along to accompany it, because
yes.
you can try and portray a horrifying scene or a scary scene, but it's the music, like the dun 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 dun. It builds up into this, oh my God, the shark's gonna eat him from Jaws, or like you're talking about with Lord of the Rings, it adds to so many moments and provides soul to the scenes outside of what the characters can do.
Uh, Speaking of Jaws, again, John Williams, can I just say, Harry
So to
Potter,
go,
like that was also John Williams. Well, the first few Harry Potters were John Williams, the original
Uh,
Harry Potter theme, Um, but you think about Mary singing that song with, we call him Grape Tomato Conqueror because all we think of is John Noble chewing on grape tomatoes while he's just like, sing me a song, boy. It's like, left him behind, the world ahead. And all the people are just going into battle. And the steward's son, who he thinks nothing of because Boromir was the best, he's
mhm.
riding to bring, you know, uh, bring his kingdom glory, to do what his father commands, to show that he is a son worthy of his father's love, which his father never sees until the very, very end. But by that time, that man had lost his mind, as Gandalf pointed out. Um,
Mhm.
but that scene with that song, Mary singing, and then the grape tomatoes popping, and that all that together, that's uh, and please go ahead. Like I just, there are no words.
What were we gonna say, Ryan?
I was just going to go a little off topic with that music and ask you guys a question. When you're writing and you get to a tough scene, or just in general when you're writing, do you guys actually listen to music to flesh out a scene, or does it distract you?
It distracts me. I'll listen to music for a story, or if I'm thinking about a story, I'll listen to music. But if if it's too noisy at the house or I need something, I'll put on classical just to kind of have white noise in the background. But mainly, it distracts me just because I'm trying to be in my head, and lyrics will draw me out, and I'll start following along with the lyrics instead.
Mhm.
I always play orchestral or anime music that has no lyrics, depending on the scene and the mood I'm trying to set. If I'm writing a battle scene, I'll have something from Star Wars, like the Empire music, or Lord of the Rings battle music, or something from anime. If I'm writing a sad scene, I'll pull like the Portals soundtrack from Avengers Endgame, and I'll play that, and I'll just let that add to the emotion of the scene that I'm writing. Music helps me bring a scene alive. It's very rare that I'm writing where I don't have some sort of music, either soft, or if I'm really in the zone, I'll blast my music at top level and I'll go. Um,
Mhm.
so I almost need it sometimes for my brain to, it just connects me and it makes the world like it's like a movie playing before my eyes. That music adds to it, and then I'm just adding the voices of what the characters are going to say for the scene to come alive.
No, that makes sense. For me, I don't use it as often, but if I do get stuck on a scene or there's a very intense scene, like a battle scene that's the climactic end to the book, like that's usually where I'll bring something in, and it sets that tone just like accompanying the movie. But just that comparison to the movie, and you're reading a book or writing a book and you don't have that music, but does it add that flair if you're reading a book and there's music playing in the background? Or I mean, it'd be impossible to find the perfect playlist to match your reading speed for a whole book, but just in general when we're writing, but just the differences there between the movies and the books with what music does bring to it and what you were talking about there. Just that question came out of my head there.
Mhm.
Absolutely. No, honestly, anything, this is what this podcast is all about, like inspiring questions about, creativity and what we do and what, for any of you who are watching this on YouTube or anywhere else, and you happen to be a writer or a creator in some aspect, put down in the comments section, what do you do when you're creating your art? Do you have something that, helps you focus or drives you or whatever it may be for your creative process? Let us know. It's neat to see how people's brains, differ and what helps them get that story or that creation out there.
Something that's kind of reminded me, books versus movie and whatnot, is the cast of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that the Viggo Mortensen, I believe, brought Aragorn to life in a way that I never thought possible. You've got oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Legolas.
Orlando Bloom.
Orlando
Yep.
Bloom. He did
Yeah.
amazing as Legolas. I mean,
Elijah Wood, what?
I don't think he was a huge name when they did that, but they brought him
No.
in, and he did a phenomenal job as Frodo. Ian McKellen. I mean, that's enough said there. But
Yeah. Elijah Wood's from my home state, from Iowa. He's actually from
oh,
Des Moines. Um, and that was his first role. His father actually pulled him out of acting after that. And didn't want him to be a part of that, that scene. To each their own, but it was nice to see Elijah Wood, come back for The Hobbit, for that small little scene.
Mm,
But he was brilliant as Frodo. You couldn't have seen anybody else playing him, just as Sean Ashton brought the role of Samwise
yeah.
Gamgee to life.
Yep.
amazing.
John, I can't think of his last name right now, but the guy who played Gimli, he's also famously known for Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he played Indy's
Yep.
best friend.
Yep.
Mhm.
He was Gimli. You think of Gimli and Legolas's relationship; those have spawned so many creative character duos in books. I mean, you think of that one still only counts as one. He was still moving. That's because I had my axe embedded in his nervous system. Toss me. What? You make the jump. That's not fair enough to toss me. Don't tell the elf. Not a word.
uh,
One of
John
the best
Rhys
scenes.
Davies.
Yeah.
John Rhys Davies.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh man, what a legend. What a legend.
Yeah.
Man, who else? Well, I mean, John Noble. That's a huge name in acting, especially British
Mhm.
actors. John Noble as not just voice acting, but classical and theatric acting. He's very much like Patrick Stewart. He's a
Yep.
huge name in the British community when it comes to actors. And he played the Steward of Gondor. And man, you couldn't have asked for. I mean, Sean Bean as Boromir. Come
Mhm.
on. By
Yeah.
the way, hashtag save Sean Bean, because he always dies with
He always
whatever role he
dies.
plays.
Oh,
Whether it's Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or The Island or whatever he's been in. Did he die in Beowulf? I can't remember.
uh, I don't know. It's been a while since I've watched Beowulf.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but
My
he
guess would be yes.
probably saved Sean
I mean,
Bean. I haven't watched.
that's the running joke for any character he plays. So,
Mhm.
They all die. That's why in Game of
yep.
Thrones in the first season, people are like, don't get attached to Eddard Stark, because it's Sean Bean, so he's not gonna live. Okay. Um no, anyways. Now we gotta get to one of the trickier questions. Which one out of the three Lord of the Rings movies is your guys' favorite one? And since I asked you the tough question, I'll go first. For me, it's the Two Towers. No question. Um, I love all of them, but the Two Towers for me, man, that was Battle of Helm's Deep. Isengard with the Ents. Like, I mean, that was just legendary. That movie.
100% agree with you there. To be honest, the Battle of Helm's Deep is what sells that movie for me, because the hopelessness that gets going at that one point where they have to retreat, the people that they have to give weapons to just to defend. It seems reminiscent of like 300 to me, and that last possible stand that you can make. Only they come out of it on the winning side in this scenario, but just the whole movie's good, having to convince the Riders of Rohan to join them and swaying the king to retreat to Helm's Deep and to protect his people, and then just that entire movie set up so much. And I think the third one is definitely worth a mention, but I just feel like it's buttoning everything up, whereas the meat and the bones is all in the Two Towers, and it's just so good on so many different levels.
So I'm gonna deviate, but I would say that the second movie is easily the one I've watched the most. It's both the Treants and the Battle at Helm's Deep are epic battle scenes, just amazing in general. But I'm gonna say Fellowship because of that end fight scene and talking about like iconic lines. How many times have we seen on TikTok or social media Aragorn kneeling in front of Frodo saying, "I would have gone with you to the end, to the very fires of Mordor." Just Boromir dying, Pippin and Merry being taken away, just all of that, the sadness of thinking Gandalf's gone, just all of that culminating in that final battle scene where the Uruk-hai and the orcs are just taking over. I love that, and that scene has resonated with me from the very first time I saw it to the time I've watched all the other movies. So I'm gonna say Fellowship just for that scene there.
No, that's a good answer.
Fellowship's actually my second favorite. Return of the King is my third, and it's not because it's not amazing. Like the Return of the King, I mean, you've got Frodo and Sam, the whole sadness with, go home, Sam. Mr. Frodo, he's poisoned your mind. Like that whole thing with Gollum and everything, and the spider, and like actually getting into if we're going to talk about just overall battles being legendary, Helm's Deep is classic, but that battle with the giant Oliphants and the army of the dead and Aragorn coming in with them and the protecting Minas Tirith from falling to the ground and then rushing the Black Gate and then that creepy looking creature like
Yeah.
like and then Aragorn just going in and chopping its head off like oh man. And then eventually actually getting to Mount Doom and so the Return of the King is awesome, but it's like you said, wrapping everything up versus some of the more iconic moments that stick with you is from Fellowship, Gandalf, you shall not pass. Flame of Undune, go back to the shadows. Like that stuff is like you don't forget it. And
No.
Helm's Deep, Isengard, everything with Saruman, and if you got the extended edition and the Return of the King is when they you get to see Saruman's like that scene more up close, like Grima Wormtongue actually like stabbing the crap out of Saruman before all of that stuff leading up to Merry getting the orb, Saruman's orb, and that whole scene. He's like looking and da 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 and like oh, and when the undead army starts coming from Minas Morgul, when Sam and Frodo and Gollum are there by the land of the dead, that is one of actually I literally created a planet that is based off of Minas Morgul from Lord of the Rings and Kingdom Society because of how cool it is. I mean, it's just gives you goosebumps, that dark fantasy-esque feel to it of the just pit of doom in your stomach, that the color of the lights that go up and everything to let you know. And then, Gandalf is standing there with Pippin, or no, he's standing there with Merry, and they're looking out and they see that light go off. And Gandalf has got some of the most legendary lines in all of Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah. A wizard never arrives. Is never late. He arrives, or nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he's supposed to.
Oh man, I'll never forget Frodo crosses his arms. You're late. The wizard is never late. He arrives precisely when he means to. And he's like laughing, like, Gandalf! Oh, Frodo. And like going through town, he's like, oh, let's see, not much to know, but and then like, that one couple, the one who's always just like like, smirking at him when he goes by and shooting the fireworks off for the kids and like and like the coolest line ever in almost all of Lord of the Rings is Gandalf is standing there with the ring and Frodo's like, what's this, these mockings, I've never seen them before. He's like, this is the language of Mordor. Can you speak it? I dare not speak it here, but it means one ring to rule them all, and in the darkness feed them. I'm like, oh man, like you just get them gritty goosebumps. That's after Gandalf like went and studied in the library to figure out if the One Ring truly was. It's a secret. It's safe. Like, oh my gosh, the first Lord of the Rings. Like now thinking about it, oh, I don't know, Alfred. I don't know. You might.
I know. I know. They're all so great though. Like
They
They are.
are.
we were talking about Bilbo's story arc, but Gollum's is one of my favorite and something I use often in my writing. Maybe not often, but I do use where you have a villain who becomes an ally who falls from grace again because that's just who they are. And that's
Mhm.
just
Yep.
beautiful. Like you've got the goodness of Frodo and Sam converting Gollum, showing him that there is still Schmeagol is still inside you. There is still goodness, but in the end, he falls anyway because some people just can't be saved. Uh, and that's one of my favorite archetypes.
And it really ties back into just the power of the ring itself and how it can corrupt somebody. And
Mhm.
questions about what could have happened to Bilbo if he would have held on to it any longer than he had it. I mean,
Yep.
it corrupted, Schmeagol was a hobbit at a time, and he had that for hundreds of years where it just made him into what he was. And you almost feel bad. It's like Sam, like Frodo said, I pity him. Like, yeah, I mean, he's this creature. And you have that whole triangle, Frodo feels bad. He understands because he has the burden of the ring. Sam's over there trying to help Frodo, and he's looking at Schmeagol just like he's trying to poison you, Mr. Frodo.
Mhm.
He's nothing but bad. And he's like, you don't understand, Sam. And it's like Sam was the one who knew all along. He was the one who was the most level-headed. Um, but everybody's just like, well, why didn't Sam just carry the ring? He couldn't. He tried. He tried to touch it once, and it was it.
Mhm.
Everybody who ever tried to touch the ring, Boromir, Aragorn, even Aragorn, the Dunedain promised king of Gondor, could not touch the ring.
Yep.
Gandalf couldn't touch the ring. He didn't dare touch it. And he is a Maiar, somebody who was
Mhm.
created by the god of the universe to literally combat evil with an immortal soul. And he couldn't touch the ring, which goes to show how powerful Sauron is as a sorcerer. And I mean, oh my gosh, the
Yeah.
the threads that are tied and twisted in Lord of the Rings is just beautiful.
Yep. Agreed.
Definitely.
Man, uh, and anybody watching or listening, if you love Lord of the Rings as much as we do, nerd out in the comments section below. I'd love to see all of your guys' opinions / reactions, questions,
Quotes.
anything. Or if you have a character that's
It's
what's that?
I was gonna say it speaks to why this story resonates so long after it was written. It's the reason that it's called the god, like at least I call it the Godfather, grandfather, father of modern day fantasy. It's got so many elements that you could see in most every book nowadays. It's because it's just so iconic, and he did a
Mm-hmm.
masterful job. Like you said earlier, Nathan, he created an entire genre all on his own.
Mhm.
Yeah, Tolkien is the godfather of fantasy. I mean, you had fairy folklore, Arthurian fantasy, all that stuff before, but Tolkien invigorated and reinvented what fantasy is known to today. I mean, as traditional fantasy goes, Lord of the Rings kind of fits that ball a little bit, but it doesn't at the same time. It's its own thing, and it's everybody looks at it and all the things that have spawned from Lord of the Rings, Skyrim, The Witcher, Game of Thrones. The list goes on. I mean, I suppose you could really say that Highlander and some of the movies made before the Lord of the Rings movies were inspired by the books.
Hmm.
You know, in
Absolutely.
order in order for us to run, somebody had to walk before. And Tolkien was an adventurer. You know, you said he was a linguist. I mean, he created the Elven language before he even wrote The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And just going around on his backpacking trips through Europe and different places to get those visualizations. If you look and you online, you can find some of Tolkien's old journal photos and pictures of like Helm's Deep and Minas Tirith and like his drawings. You're like, wow, just wow.
Yeah.
But all in all, as Lord of the Rings goes, we could go on, and we will have other episodes where we talk about Lord of the Rings again, or Tolkien, or things of that nature. But we'll end today's podcast episode by talking about our ranking for Lord of the Rings on a 10-point scale, um, on creativeness, joy, first time experience, and just pure overall, like just how good it is. So I'll go first, and I'll give. They say nothing is perfect, and nothing truly is, but the experience of Lord of the Rings is a 10 in my mind, a 10 out of 10 across the board. For everything, it's reading it is a little bit more difficult than watching it, just because of how thick it is um to go through and decipher. But it's also kind of like a project. It's like a maze, a map, a mystery. It's fun. Um, so 10 out of 10 for Lord of the Rings for me.
Can I go 12? What were you saying, Ryan?
I was just gonna agree that with the 10 or the 12, but I mean, he set the tone and created something that all of us are trying to expand upon and make better. And you can't necessarily compare that to what's out there today in the same light. Like what Nathan was saying, he created something completely different. And we're all trying to one up it. None of us ever will, but we will create something in its own right that may be just as good. But he just set the bar for all of us to take. And like you said, he walked. Now we get to run, but he walked on water, essentially. So
Yeah, I was only like not really joking with the 12, but like just even from like a literary standpoint, the way he arranged the books, because it's in the Two Towers, it's part one, part two, and part three basically in the book. You get this point of view, that point of view, this point of view, and it's just so well done. Because I think part two is basically all a flashback when you're talking to Merry and Pippin about Isengard and everything. And I don't think that was really done at that point. So it really is a 12 out of 12 all the way across, just because it's so well done and so ahead of its time. And the first time you experience it, whether video or reading it or audiobook, it's just fabulous, amazing.
Remember, everybody, if you have creative minds, remember, if you're in the process of putting something out, don't let the amazing things of the past intimidate you. Don't let other works of art out there scare you away from creating your own masterpiece. As we said, somebody had to walk in order for us to run. We have to run in order for someday somebody to sprint, and that person has to sprint in order for somebody else to achieve light travel speed. So, y'all, you have something inside of your heart and your soul that you want to get it out there, because there's something out there that's some reader is out there lonely in a reading slump, and they're looking for something specifically and they haven't found it yet. Maybe your idea is exactly what they're looking for. And don't be afraid to be taboo, to break the rules, to go against the norm, because that's where you get these unique ideas like Ready Player One, Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, things that seem maybe a little bit different or against what the norm of the genre is, but it becomes its own thing. And everybody for decades and decades, it's like they say, a book will never go away. It will always be remembered forever. And our goal is to just have something that can be remembered, to be quoted, like Ryan said. That's the coolest thing, is when you start seeing memes on the internet about your book, or You go on Amazon and you see people highlighting Kindle sentences or phrases like 9,543 readers highlighted, "I love you, Rose. You're everything to me." You're like, oh, wow. Well, okay. So if I write a line similar to that, maybe I can get 9,000 people highlighting, you know? Uh, yeah, I mean, pretty much that's it in a nutshell, y'all. For us, you can find us on social media. For me, it's the Funky Fantasy Man, or author Nathan Helm on TikTok and Facebook.
Alfred Muller on Facebook, Alfred Muller 922 on TikTok.
You can find me at stratoseros.com or author Stratoseros on TikTok.
And yeah, we hope y'all enjoyed our first real discussion about, well, one specific book or slash movie topic. We're going to be getting into movie and TV reviews and other stuff later, but we're just kind of taking it slow. But for today, this has been the Lord of the Rings recap from your bearded nerds. And until next time, let the war rage on. Freaking do 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 funk fantasy do 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 the bow do 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 stratus arrows dun 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 dun. It's the war of nerds.